we got all the stuff, calls to order and all that stuff. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll now call the special meeting of the City Council to order at 5:11 p.m. on this August 12th, 2021. We could have Peter Arth lead us in the flag salute.
Gladly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do roll call.
Councilmember Arth.
Here.
Councilmember Deutsch.
Here.
Councilmember Keisler is absent. Councilmember Lucchese.
Present.
Mayor Bryan.
Present. All right. Tonight we have both a special presentation regarding the water and wastewater rate study, and then one business item discussing as well. So, take it away, Councilman Deutsch.
Okay. Councilors, Mayor, and public. I'm here to report on the work of the special committee that was formed, the ad hoc committee, to study the water rates and sewer rates. What I want to do here to begin with is to, let me see if I can do this here. What I'd like to be able to do here is to set the stage for how this process works as far as the city going through this process of identifying rates and passing them. Also give a little bit of a history, so we look at how we got to where we are and where we are going forward. And then after that, we'll turn it over to Paul Reuter from PACE, and he'll go through what we've come up with as far as the numbers. Next slide, please. I wish we'd set it up. Okay, let me just figure out how to get you. Go ahead. Let me never get to do one of these. We'll just go from there. Okay, so what I want to cover to begin with is the relationships between the federal, state, and the city. With that in mind, it froze or something? It's a regular PowerPoint, is it not moving?
The whole computer froze, Bruce. Sorry.
Oh.
Broke it. Okay, keep going, Bruce. I've lived.
I'll tell you what I'll do. Okay, keep working if you will, sir, and I'll keep working from this standpoint, going through the words and all that kind of stuff. So let me get started. Okay, the federal and state regulate the operations of our systems. So they tell us for these particular systems what we have to do, not only to maintain the operation, but what we have to do to maintain the finances to make sure that those operations are never in jeopardy. So the state and federal regulate those operations, and then the state regulates the process of setting the rates. This is really different than the whole idea of coming up with a tax increase. When people that I've noticed on Facebook have said, why are they asking us to increase the rates again? It's because costs go up, things change, repairs are made, new repairs are identified. And the state says, you have to keep up with that. So the way we go through that process is by having a 5-year process where we go through, identify all of the things that have been done, all the things that still need to be done, and then we look at the numbers. And so that's the process that this committee went through. And when we come on to Paul will be giving us those numbers and our recommendations based on what we saw there. Federal and state also provide loans and grants to meet capital improvements. So in general, what we're paying for as ratepayers is for operations and maintenance. for the work that needs to be done, like improving the springs, the source of our water, improving our sewer system, our plant. All of those come out of capital improvement. And there's no way that we as a city, particularly our size, could come up with the money to fund those kind of things. So the way it works is that the federal government and the state have a system of grants and loans that we go through. But the key thing that most people don't realize is that those are treated just like you're a customer trying to get a loan for anything else. You have to have the right financial situation in place, including rates, that the governments, the state, federal governments think are appropriate. So those are numbers that we can't fudge with. Those are numbers that we have to work with. And so those are the numbers that we'll be looking at in detail going forward. And then through that process, the city manages this through two enterprise funds, the water fund and the sewer fund. These are funds that are separate and apart from anything else. They don't come into play with the general fund. There is a possibility from one fund to another to make loans, but that's an official process that's not hidden under any desks or anything. It's done if it's necessary between different rates, different systems. Now, the rates must be based on the funds necessary to operate and maintain the water and sewer systems. The city is also required to maintain a certain percentage of monies paid with regards to, oh, we're on the next one, sorry, next one. Okay, so the rates must be set based on the funds necessary to operate and maintain the system. Those funds include payments for loans required. So when we look at these numbers, when we say, great, we got a low interest loan, we have to keep paying that loan and we have to maintain it just like we were a customer with a bank wanting to maintain a loan on a house or on a boat or car. It's the same situation. The whole process is based on the creation and maintenance of a master water plan. That is a process through which an engineering firm, in our case Tate, goes through the whole process of identifying all the different weaknesses in the system, all the different things that need to be upgraded, and they provide us with a plan that we work off of. The plan that we now have was based on the work that was done in 2015 and 2016. So what we're doing now is coming up and saying, okay, we have a 5-year cycle. Each 5 years we look at these rates and we determine are they up to where they need to be to maintain our systems. Right now we're at that look. And so we're looking now at the new numbers based upon the original, or I should say the 2015-16 Master Water Plan. And now we're moving forward and saying, where are we now? A sewer rate study was completed 2 years ago. One of the things we decided to do was, rather than say, okay, every 5 years we do a sewer, and then every 5, and then we have to do 2 of them, we're going to join them together, so every 5 years we have one committee meeting, one meeting looking at both systems and going forward from there. So we think that's an efficient way of doing it. It also means we're not going to be spending as much money on pace year after year, so that helps us there too. Next. So the history of the plans and studies. First of all, the water system we had, if you don't know, was originally run by the Dunsmuir Water Corporation, which from the 1900s managed that system. In 1989, the city purchased that water system, and then in 1994, Tate developed the first master water plan. So now we can go back to that period of time and saying, okay, it started then, they waited a few years, they came up with a plan and moved it forward. In 2007, there was a rate increase that occurred that was meant to address some of those. One of the things that happened was they weren't able to do enough with the rates we had in place, and we weren't eligible for loans and grants. So that's why 5 years ago, we ended up with a huge problem and a huge change in rates we had to do to make up for a period of time where we had not been keeping up with our planning process and rate process. In 2016, we developed a second and current master water plan that in 2016, the city successfully set rates through the Prop 218 process. Next. The original system created just go through it to you. The original sewer system was created in the 1900s. In 1968, the sewers were constructed in North Dunsmuir. 1975, original downtown sewers were replaced. 1989, the South Dunsmuir area west of the Sacramento River was sewered. I like that word. And in 2007, Tate developed the master sewer plan. So that's the history of where we got to here.
And 2019.
Oh, and in 2019, we set rates through a Prop 218 process, and again, we're trying to get them in sync now. Thank you. our unique situation, this is one thing that I really got to get across to everybody. When you think of water and sewer in our city, you have to remember, first of all, that we want to keep our unchlorinated water. We're one of the very few cities in the whole state that's allowed to do this. And the reason we're allowed to do that is because we've been able to maintain a safe flow of water from the springs where the Moss Gray Springs are out to our system. Now, along that time, we had problems with infiltration into the water mains, but we also had problems up the springs. If we get to the point where we get too many hits, because there's too much of that chloroform popping in throughout the system, we could end up losing the ability to be non-chlorinated. We have to keep that in our mind anytime we talk about the water and what we have to do to maintain our water system. So that's why we need a capital improvement program at the springs that we're looking at. Coliform, I'm sorry.
Not chlor. It is not chloroform. It is
Thank you, ma'am.
coliform.
Coliform. We are one of the fortunate cities also to live on a pristine river like the Sacramento River. Now, what does that mean? That means when we get done with our water, we got to be able to put it back into the river in a way that we can feel good swimming down below it. Simple as that. I mean, you couldn't do any more than say, would you like to swim below our outlet? So those are the unique situations that face us as a city when we have to maintain our systems. Is a unique situation where we are today. Tate has provided updates to our master water plan based on the significant work done these last 5 years. One of the things people have to realize when they look at this whole funding process is that money flows in based upon some things, and it goes out based upon a whole other different set of things. So sometimes we may be a little bit more in cash, and other times we're not. So the point is that we have to come up with a way to have these operations safe and going forward for those years. The committee is here making a proposal based on our analysis. Next. If the council approves the proposed rates, the city manager will kick off a Prop 218 process, and then the city will hold a town hall to explain the rate changes. I remember hearing, and I'm sure that Councilman Arthur will remember this, that back in 2007 when they attempted to go through the rate process, I was told that the meeting lasted about 6 hours. It was almost violent, and at one point, the person from USDA said he had to leave because he felt for his safety. When we came together in 2016, having gone through the process that was led by both Paul Reuter and Randy Johnson, a very experienced city manager, we set ourselves on a new path. And it's a path to do the right thing at the right time going forward from here. And so that's what I'm hoping that we can do going through this process. Finally, where we have come from. When the rate study took place in 2015-16, the city had miles of water mains that were 100 years old. The rates to support replacing those were not sufficient to obtain the loans and the grants. We did not have a financial situation where anyone would give us money. So we went through a difficult decision to support what we knew were honest rates. We hated that process. But what that did was get us up to where we're now in a good spot. So what do we want to do from here? It seems logical to me is to stay in that same spot. From here going forward, to follow through every 5 years doing this, following through with rate studies every 5 years, simply just looking at what needs to be done and how can we pay for it. And I think that is the process that we want to maintain, and that's where Paul will get into in the numbers. Next. As a result of this influx, we took a major step in modernizing our water distribution system. Now the challenge before us is maintaining that eligibility. Next, I think the last slide. The rate we're proposing is our very best effort to meet those. So we knew that when we were going to come up here that we were going to say we're going to raise rates and people were going to complain. What we decided to do was to be as upfront as we could and simply explain to everybody that this is not something we're doing because we want to. It's something we're doing because we're required to do. We're raising rates to where they need to be, and we think we found a way to solve one of the problems with an increase that we didn't like. So we're trying to maintain a steady increase, but it has to be an increase within the bounds of what we're required to do. So that's what I have, and Paul, would you like to take it from there?
Much more quick on steps.
mud.
Questions as we go on, or hold until the end of the presentation?
Let's hold them till the end of the presentation. Or, yeah, unless we would like to proceed with questions, Councilman Deutsch first.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. I'm going to get into some of the more boring things like numbers, but I'll start off first. We'll talk about the Water Enterprise Fund, and then we'll go into the Sewer Enterprise Fund. So with kind of both discussions, I'm kind of going to start out with a little background and really focus on capital improvements, because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do with these enterprise funds, is fund improvements to your system. So on the water side, I won't spend a lot of time on this because Bruce did a great job on background and how we got here, but the master plan in 2015 identified about $16 million worth of needed improvements in your water system. Right after that master plan was completed, the city went through the 5-year water rate study that Bruce mentioned. And as part of that, the 5-year financial plan that ended June 30th, 21, the plan was to fund about $15 million worth of improvements. So just under what the master plan identified, but pretty darn close. So I threw a couple slides in there. Some of these people may have seen, but there's pictures of historical water leaks that the city's had. You'll see in a few slides the impact that fixing leaks has had on the Water Enterprise Fund in the last year or two. It's been substantial. Everybody's aware of this citywide improvement project that's going on around the city all summer now and will go well into the fall. And that project is replacing leaks like this. Go ahead, Doug.
I was going back and forth, sorry, Paul.
No worries. So this table kind of summarizes what the city has been able to accomplish since the last rate study in 2016. And in a nutshell, you saw in the previous slide that the financial plan was intended to fund about 15 million worth of capital improvements. Well, the city's been able to get nearly 20 million in capital improvements with 11.4 million in grant. Now, half of those projects are either done or under construction, like your big project now. But the Mossbury Springs improvements and the downtown tank improvements, the city has received funding commitments for those projects. And those projects will go out to bid probably around the end of this year and be constructed next year. Go ahead, Blake. So in terms of the financial review, that's essentially what we do as a committee to determine what this financial plan needs to look like, what the future rates need to look like. It's all about financials. So we dive pretty deep into the city's financials. And one thing that's very helpful is to look back at the previous 5 years and see how the revenues and expenditures played out relative to what we projected 5 years ago. Because keep in mind, we're trying to project these to be determined revenues and expenses, and it can be challenging. So when we look back at the water fund for the last 5 years, in 2016, we proposed a 1% inflation on expenses. Well, it turned out it was nearly 5% on expenditures. And kind of the three main culprits, a big one, were water main repairs and insurances, employee-related costs. Like Bruce pointed out in his discussion, the cost of doing business, whether it's a city enterprise fund or a private business or a state or federal agency, it's not going down, guys. We know that. We see what CPI inflation is doing, materials and all that sort of thing. So the water fund has done well from the standpoint of generating revenue. It's sitting on just around $1 million in cash. And the reason is that we haven't implemented those capital improvements, all of them that we identified in 2016. It took longer to do that. And the reason it took longer is because the city and us chose to go after the grant funding. And the grant funding takes longer to get through. So here we are at the end of our 5-year cycle, but all the projects that we identified 5 years ago are either constructed, being constructed, or you've got the money to do it and will be constructed by the end of next year. So I think that's pretty good. Go ahead, Doug.
Revenues are close to actual.
Okay, yeah, good point. So even though the expenses were higher than we projected, our revenue projections were very close, within a couple percent. So one thing that we're incorporating in that's very important, as Bruce alluded to, when it comes to borrowing money, lenders want you to collect a little bit more revenue than what your obligation to them is to make sure that you can make their payment, right? So the city has 3 existing loans in its water enterprise fund, and the highest debt coverage ratio of those loans is 1.1. That means that to stay in good standing with that loan agreement, the city needs to collect about 10% more revenue than the total debt obligation.
Paul, I'm sorry, not to ask a question, would you emphasize that or not? This is, I think, one of the most important things here. Kind of make it as clear as you can about debt ratio.
Yeah, and it's basically the city needs to maintain that debt coverage ratio to remain in good standing with the lender. And it's simply defined as taking your total revenue, subtract your total expenses, and what you have left over needs to be 10% more than your debt payment obligation. So you think about that, the more debt the city owes, the higher that 1.1 threshold needs to be, and therefore the higher the rates need to be to cover that coverage ratio. So it behooves the city to reduce debt. So one thing that we came up with at the committee level is the city has a 1994 USDA loan. It owes about $300,000 on it. If we pay that off with cash reserves that you have, it lowers that debt coverage ratio and lowers the need for a really high rate out of the gate to meet that. So that's one recommendation that the committee is making to council, is to pay that loan off with the portion of your reserve funds. And then I'll talk more about this, the bottom bullet, when we get to sewer, but that the water fund needs to make about a $500,000 loan to the sewer fund to make it whole. And so the water fund has the money to do that. And we'll go into that more when I get to the sewer side. Go ahead, Blake. So in terms of planned expenditures, these are cash expenditures in the water enterprise, and this is over the proposed 5-year period. From this year over the next 5 years, we would anticipate the district or the city needs to contribute about $500,000 towards the Moss Spray Springs improvements. It's a $1.8 million project. You're getting 1.3 from IRWM, and the shortfall is about $490,000. Also, we're working on a UV disinfection planning project for the city, which if you guys can get a grant-funded UV disinfection project, it would take the need for chlorine away when you have to emergency chlorinate if you have positive coliform or whatever. So that could be very beneficial. We're kind of in the fledgling stage of that, but there's money there for UV projects. And then lastly, over the 5-year period, the city will be able to accumulate just over $1 million that it can apply towards the next phase of water main replacements. So keep in mind, the big water main replacement project that's going on now are the highest priority, but there's still some more to do when that's done. Go ahead, Blake. So just like we did in 2016, we want to try to maintain a 25% operating reserve. And all that means is that if your annual expenditures are, say, $100,000, we want to keep $25,000 in a reserve account at all times. It's basically the city savings account. It's no different than a lot of us that have savings account. They recommend you have, 3 months worth of household expenses set aside for a rainy day kind of thing. That's pretty common. On the capital project side, we would like to maintain about $200,000 in the capital projects reserve at all times. And that goes toward, fixing main leaks and unforeseen expenditures. So kind of to take all that I just discussed and put it into numerical form, we create this table called the financial plan that's very similar to what was provided in the 2016 study. And essentially what it does is the first column there that says budgeted 2021, those are the financial parameters for the fiscal year that just ended June 30th, 2021. So it starts out with a beginning balance, which is your reserve fund balance. It has unrestricted cash and restricted cash reserves. You add revenue to that, you subtract expenses, you subtract capital projects, you subtract debt, and then at the bottom of the table, you end up with an ending balance, right? And so that ending balance becomes the beginning balance for the next year, and that process populates the table going across. And so what we're looking at is at the bottom of the table, we're trying to maintain that 25% operating reserve, and that you can see at the bottom that we're able to do that in all years. And then the other important thing is to maintain at least a 1.1 debt coverage ratio. And so right now, because the city, the loan payments for your water project haven't gone into effect, you've got a pretty high debt coverage ratio. But as soon as you have to start paying back the loan on the project you have, the requirement's gonna go up, your debt coverage ratio is gonna go down. But as you can see in years 4 and 5, we're able to maintain greater than a 1.1 debt coverage ratio. Go to the next slide, Blake. So this is just kind of a pie chart showing does a 5-year look back, all the revenue that came into your water enterprise fund, where did it go? Okay, this is the previous 5 years since 2016. So as you can see, about half the revenue coming into the fund goes to annual operating expenses. There's a pretty good slice there, 1.3 million into the capital projects reserve, and that accumulated that much because we were so delayed in implementing capital projects. But we have plans for that, as you've seen. And then the yellow slice is what went into your 25% operating reserve, and then the small slice there, the 180,000, was what the city paid towards debt service. Go ahead and go to the next one, Blake. So this pie chart is a 5-year allocation of money that goes toward capital improvements, replacing tanks and pipelines and pumps and all those sorts of things. This is a 5-year look back as well. However, I did include the future capital grants because those have been acquired by the city. We just haven't built it yet. So you've got, about 7.9 million in loans, about 6.8 in grants, about 900,000 in city cash contribution, and a future grant allocation, which the city has funding agreements for, of about 5.5 million. Go ahead, Blake. So this is to be able to implement the financial plan that I just presented in the previous couple slides. These would need to be the rates going forward. So the yellow line shows the percentage increase by year. So the first year, which is the year we're in, would be 5%, and then 6, 6, 3, and 3%. As you get to years 4 and 5, it can be more of an inflationary increase. But these first 3 years need to be a little more than inflation in order to get the revenue up to meet that 1.1 debt coverage ratio. That's really what's driving the rates. And so the numerical values, right now we're about 40, then it goes to 42, and then 44, 50, and so on, until it gets to year 5 when it's about 50. So over a 5-year period, it's projected to go from 40 currently to 50. Go ahead, next slide, Blake. So this is a comparison of other agencies in Northern California water rates. Now, these rates are based on the average monthly water consumption of about 6,000 gallons a month for a typical house in Dunsmuir. That's about 8 units of water, okay? So you go over to the far left, Mount Shasta's way down there, but they're getting ready to do their rate studies again, and that's going up. Then you got City Shasta Lake, Bella Vista, Clear Creek, City of Redding, Centerville CSD, City of Weed, City of Oroville, Mountain Gate, and then Dunsmuir is the red one. That would be, even though it says 47.75, that's based on consuming 6,000 gallons. So a $40 base rate plus the consumption rate for 8 units of water, basically, okay? And then next is City of Wairika, and then actually got 2 Wairikas there, got their current and then their 22-23 rate. McLeod, Shasta CSD, City of Ashland, and then Dunsmuir on the right. And then the yellow or orangish yellow is the average California water rate in 2015. So that's 6 years old. So you look at it and you go, man, you're proposing rates that go way off to the right end of the scale. Well, keep in mind, all those other rates for those other cities aren't going to stay static over the next 5 years, right? So the important thing is, right now your rates are pretty much in the middle of the pack. So with that, if you want to save questions, Matt, or I can go into the sewer.
I think it might actually be helpful to address water.
I do just have one. What if we were to go with the recommendation for spending down the reserve level in water, what percentage would that leave us with for if we were to pay off that loan?
What percentage of
or how much
reserve? How much reserve? Well, right now you've got about 1.1 million. So you pay $500,000, you got 600,000 left, but you're going to have more money each year coming into that.
So we're still over the 25.
Follow-up
What's that?
question on that would be, what is our interest rate on the 310?
No, it's 94 interest rates weren't like they are today. It's around 5, I think, 4 or 5. It's on the documents, Matt, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But it's not like today's interest rates. So yeah, so you know, I think from that perspective, I think it's worthwhile paying it off. But the other thing that does is if we don't pay that loan off, the rates that I just presented are going to have to be higher to meet the debt coverage ratio.
But at the same time, we're proposing direct cash expenditures in excess of that, so.
Well, and that's, I showed those cash expenditures over a 5-year period. So that's over a 5-year period, not all in 1 year. So you're going to be bringing revenue each year into that fund. And I'll be following up with a more detailed tech memo that's not quite as broad brushed, that'll kind of spell out, you know, those capital improvements and that sort of thing. It might be a little clearer.
All right.
Well, one of the things that uncover your mic real quick, sorry.
We're trying to minimize.
Yeah, perfect.
One of the things that caught my eye was on the proposed water rates chart. Can you put that back up? It's 19.
Yeah.
And I can't actually read that, so I'm looking at my handout.
Sure.
But the second line of my handout says Lifeline 5/8 meter monthly service charge.
Yeah.
Is that existing or proposed?
Well, that's a carryover, and that's something that we need to talk to city attorney about. But in 2016, it was okay to have a lifeline rate, and basically that is intended for income qualifying households that are below a certain threshold. But there's been some Prop 218 precedents since then that have deemed that a violation of Prop 218, because under Prop 218, you can't have any user group subsidizing another. So that we need to still look into with the city attorney. So it's just a carryover from the last study, but that may need to go away for legal reasons.
I want to be part of that legal discussion.
Okay.
Because I think the position, I sort of disagree. The state has no role in setting the rates for the city of Dunsmuir for water or sewer services. The city of Dunsmuir sets the rates for the city of Dunsmuir.
Right.
The state, publicly owned utilities, privately owned utilities have lifeline rates.
Yeah.
For electricity, for water, for sewer, and it stuns me that anyone could opine differently, especially using 218. So as rates continue to go up in our income limited community, it's going to be essential to have lifeline rates both for commodities and for service charges.
Right. Yeah, good point. I'm just not an attorney and not an expert, so we'll need to get John Kinney involved in as we finalize that. But good points.
All right, could you help build some context around the 4.7% annual inflation rate that you found in the expenses of water, and maybe talk about, you know, the dollar amount gap that ended up being out over the course of 5 years?
Yeah, I have all those numbers, Matt, just not off the top of my head. But basically what we did is we went through every expense category, and I've got a spreadsheet built that I don't have with me, but it lists kind of the overage or under budget amount over the 5-year period and it was really across the board. It was kind of amazing. It wasn't just 2 or 3 expense, it was really everything. And some more than others. But I just looked at it for presentation purposes as kind of an average annual, and it's about 4.7%. But
I think it's all the finance director's fault.
No,
So it's
No.
roughly, like, if we're looking at a 2.1 million 5-year annual operating, what would be compounded each year, right? 5%?
yeah, it would be, yes.
Yeah, so we'd be looking at, so somewhere along around $200,000+.
Yeah, probably. That's not unreasonable. No, that's probably what it was. It was fairly substantial. And like I say, a lot of it were, you know, leak repairs that, how do you anticipate that, you know? But we have the details on that.
Okay. That kind of goes back to some of my thoughts on all of this, which is anything that we can put on an expense at a low interest rate with the way the costs of goods, labor,
Sure.
everything's going up. If we can spend it now, spread it out over into the future, we're really paying, nominally we're paying 1%, 2%, but the more we can do that, I think the better off we're going to be, because we'll be paying actually, negative interest on it. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And, the nice thing about the water fund now is you have cash, and all, the idea is to finish all these identified capital improvements without taking on any more loans. Because any amount of loan we take, even if it's zero or very little interest, raises that 1.1 requirement, which raises the need to raise rates.
Could you talk a little bit about the 1.135 million expected in water main replacements in the
Yeah.
next 5 years?
Yeah,
I know we had this large package, almost $11 million
right.
between grants and a large loan to complete it. Was it not possible to add on? It seems like a relatively small amount relative to what the work we're doing already. And just build some context for what that is and whether it's possible to pursue grants or loans to get this done faster and not spread it out.
Yeah, well, good question. And really, the project that's being constructed now was scoped as part of a planning grant that the city got through the state revolving fund. And so that planning grant paid for design and environmental and applications and all this stuff. And so the scope of that work was limited by the amount of the planning grant on what you could do, okay? So we tried to maximize it, and we did the planning grant. We were going for state money, and the state kept dragging their feet, and USDA came in and said, hey, if you guys go with us, we can add this much more grant to it and get you going 6 months sooner. And we said, go for it. So we dropped the state. But that's kind of how that materialized. So it wasn't, we knew after the planning grant that we weren't gonna be able to do everything in one big project. And there was actually some thought on this project we did split it into schedules. We had 2 schedules to try to split it up and to make it attractive to smaller contractors and maybe take advantage of better pricing. And it turned out that the one contractor was the low bidder on both schedules.
It worked out well.
Yeah.
The bidding went, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, how do you foresee that being spent over the course of 5 years? Is this spend money on planning, apply for more grants, loans,
Yeah.
come back, spend 1.135 on a project? Or is this over the course of the years, we're going to be spending roughly a fifth of it each year ourselves without any help, without any loans,
Yeah.
chipping away at it?
Everything you mentioned is a possibility. Okay, so we haven't completely determined, how we're going to roll that next project out. You've got the project you have going on, downtown tank, the spring project, and your staff's overwhelmed, and we're kind of going, okay, let's get these kind of done. But the point is that you've got the resources to do any and all the things that you discussed to facilitate this next project, using a big portion of your own funding and not having to get outside funding to complete design and environmental and right-of-way and permits and all that stuff. And you may be able to fund a portion of the construction with that.
Well, I'm more interested in borrowing at interest rates now. I think that would help you in the long run for the ratepayers than having to fund it.
Well, keep in mind, it's going to require a higher rate increase, right? Because that debt coverage ratio, whatever the payment is on that loan, adds to your debt coverage ratio, and it's going to require a rate increase to maintain the 1.1.
Well, it's raise $1 million in 5 years or borrow $1 million over 30 years, 1%. I think we benefit from trying to pursue the loans as best as possible. But
yeah, well, we live in a grant world, right? So we hate loans. We like grants. So we're gonna, we want to try to maximize the grant for the city. Loan is an absolute last resort. But if we get to that point, we would want to sit down and look at the numbers and does it make sense for the city?
All right, and then a quick question. We've always talked about the 25% reserve. We've also talked, just recently, we passed a resolution at the last city council meeting requiring special act of council to transgress on that 25% reserve. So in addition to it, we had the capital, I know you think in terms of capital improvement, operating costs, that's logical for this. What is the dollar amount of 25% operating reserves per year plus that 200,000?
Yeah.
Is that typical for cities to have those split up?
It is, Matt, and I've seen different percentages. Okay, 25% is common, and that's kind of where we start. But I've worked with cities that have even have 5% or 20%. I've got a couple cities that they want a 50% operating reserve. But in my experience, that operating reserve is always additive to your capital projects reserve in terms of managing, differently.
Okay, so it's just any given day, we could have an expense that's almost 200,000. Hopefully not, but it's possible.
Yeah.
So additional cushion.
Yeah, so hey, Blake, if you can go back to the financial plan table, I can show you the numbers. But yeah, that's something that we talked about at the committee level quite a bit, Matt. And, it's one of those things that there's rules of thumb, but there's no hard set or fast rules. And it could be really anything, whatever the city feels comfortable with. It doesn't have to be 25%.
No, I wasn't talking about that. I guess I'm just wondering what our actual percentage is if we're 25% plus 200,000.
Yeah, so for example, like, so we have this year, the end of this year, we're hoping we have 172,000 in operating reserve and 897,000 in capital projects reserve. That 172,000 translates to 27%. So that's a little higher. So the next year, we're taking a little more from that, and we're right at 25%, it's right about 107,000.
Right. Thank you. That's all I have on the water for now. Are there any other questions? Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, ready, Blake? Go to sewer.
Almost there. There we go.
Okay, so kind of similar, talk a little bit about background. Bruce talked quite a bit about background, but I'll just touch on a few things. As Bruce indicated, the master sewer plan was done in 2007. It identified about $6.3 million of improvements. In 2010, the state came along and imposed new copper, zinc, and ammonia restrictions on your wastewater discharge to the Sacramento River.
And that is again back to the why we have to do it because of the river.
Right. And that led to a $7 million project shortly thereafter to make improvements to the treatment plant and do some collection improvements, but not all the improvements identified in the master plan. Go ahead, Blake. So then in 2016, the city applied for and obtained 2 planning grants from the state revolving fund, $500,000 each, one for water, or one for collection and one for wastewater treatment. Both of those applications have been submitted to the state. We just heard actually in the last week from the state that the city is likely to get a funding agreement for the collection system project in first quarter 2022. So sometime between January and the end of March. That would be all 100% grant funded to make collection system improvements to your sewer system. So that's good news. We're still waiting on the wastewater treatment plant though. Go ahead, Blake. Okay, so as Bruce mentioned, the last sewer rate study was done in 2019, and as part of that rate study, we had planned on funding a $4.5 million collection project with loan funds, and we've kind of changed our mind on that in light of the grant availability that's currently occurring. So go ahead. So similar with the water fund, we did a look back on the sewer enterprise fund. In 2019, we assumed 2.5% per year inflation. The actual expenses in the sewer enterprise were pretty spot on in the last couple of years. However, we did have a revenue shortfall that we noticed after 1 year, and after considerable investigation, we realized that there was a misinterpretation of the city billing data, and we thought we were projecting data from more single-family residents than actually existed. So that's a bummer. And it's led to a revenue shortfall in 2 years. But as Bruce indicated, there's a desire and a good practice, in my opinion, for the city to sync both the water and sewer studies, do them at the same time, do 5-year look-aheads. That way you guys are only dealing with it once every 5 years, and you're going to save on consultant costs. So the revenue shortfall means is that the rates we proposed in 2019 aren't enough, and there's going to have to be some adjustments going forward to bring that fund into the black. Go ahead, Blake. So similar to the water fund, the sewer fund has 3 loans, but unfortunately, one of those loans has a 1.2 debt coverage ratio on the sewer fund. So that means that your net revenue needs to be 20% more than your debt service, not 10% like in your water fund. So to rub salt in the wound, we know we have a rate increase, and now we have this higher debt coverage ratio to meet, which makes it even worse in the sewer fund. So as I indicated in the presentation on the water, the recommendation is to utilize some of the cash accumulation in the water fund, loan about $500,000 to the sewer fund, bring it into the black, and then the sewer fund will start making payments back to the water fund in year 23, 24. The advantage of doing that is that it keeps the first couple year rate increases in the sewer fund less than they could be. That's the advantage of doing that. Go ahead, Blake. So again, planned capital projects in the sewer fund. We're not planning any more debt over the next 5 years in the sewer fund. No loan funded. We're maxed out already. However, it sounds like there's a very good possibility the city will get, $13-14 million in grant from the state to do collection and treatment improvements. So we're still working on that. We still have the 25% operating reserve here, and this one too, Matt. For capital projects, the sewer fund doesn't have the cash that the water fund does, so to try to maintain a $200,000 capital reserve in that fund would break us. So we're looking at something down into the 50,000 range, maybe even 40, just to provide a little bit of cash in that fund so we can get our feet back on the ground. Go ahead, Blake. Similar to water, we've got the financial plan here. It works the same way. The upper left, right here, that's the beginning balance funds that came into the current fiscal year, came in July 1, 2020. And then to those cash balances, we add revenue, subtract expenses, debt, capital, and at the bottom, we're left with beginning balance for last fiscal year, which for us was June 30th, 2021. Yeah. And as you can see here, the 180,000 in there, that looks impressive, but that's restricted cash. That's tied up in debt service reserves, so you can't mess with that. So it's really the difference between 47 and negative 55. Finished this year about 8,000 in the hole on school. So those balances go to beginning balances for this fiscal year and go down through the same process. As you can see in that table, the red 500,000 is the loan coming in from the water fund, and then this is going out the water fund in fiscal year 2024. So it's the same thing on the bottom. You can see. No worries.
Paul, would you clarify one thing here? I think
Yes.
we need to, and that is that this is not some deal where we kind of sneak things from one enterprise fund to another. It's an established process with a signed document and established interest rates, right?
Yes, that is true. And honestly, it's not that uncommon for enterprise funds to loan money back and forth. I would say most of the public agencies that I work with, they have to do that once in a while. And it's common, but it's formal, like you said. And in this case, we think it's a good idea because it's going to mitigate the rate impact to your customers for the first few years. And the water fund has the ability to do it. So it's...
Wouldn't it add to the 1.1?
It's a good question. I would say if the bank doesn't ask, we won't tell them. Is that being recorded? It's a great question, Matt.
Was it worked into the plan for it?
No. Great question, though. So at the bottom of the table, we're still trying to track our operating reserve. We're trying to hit this 25% reserve here. We do in the fifth year, but our debt coverage ratio now is not very good, and we're building that up. We need to get above 1.2, and we're able to do that in the last 3 years of the plan. So if you go to the next slide, Blake, to be able to accomplish that financial plan, these would be the rates going forward. And it's not pretty, but we'll see in the next slide, how realistic it is. But currently the city's at 50, and rates would need to go to like 59, and then 67, and eventually at the end of year 5, up to 77, which is huge. But if you go to the next slide, you kind of compare the city of Dunsmuir versus other municipalities that have similar wastewater treatment disposal facilities as the city. That means that you are treating wastewater and discharging it into a water body in the state of California. So you can't compare your system to the city of Weed or the city of Wairika that discharge into the ground. Their discharge requirements are off the chart easier than you guys. You guys are being hammered because you're at the top end of a blue ribbon trout stream, upper Sacramento River, and you're getting the book thrown at you by state regulators. So you can kind of see from this graph, you've got city of Dunsmuir on the far right at $50. You've got city of Redding, Cottonwood, both discharging in Sacramento River. City of Mount Shasta, same thing. These are proposed levy rates. City of Shasta Lake goes into Turn Creek, which is tributary to Sacramento River. Cherokee Valley CSD is Quincy. They go to Spanish Creek, which goes into the Federal River. Using Mount Shasta, our future Dunsmuir rates in 5 years compared to the year. Mount Shasta in 5 years is going to be there. Shasta Lake is going to be there in 4 years. You got Moose in Sacramento River, Lake, Sacramento River, Rio Vista, and Delta. So the rate increases are substantial, but we can't overemphasize the cost that it takes to treat and dispose of wastewater and discharge into a water body like the upper Sacramento River. And it costs money.
And that chart right there is one of the most important ones for people to digest, understand why our rates are the way they are.
And one of the, when we were going through this, Blake and I sat down with city staff, with your wastewater treatment operators, your utility supervisors, and we went through the budget line by line on, what can we cut? What can we cut out of this budget and still make this place run? And at the end of it, I was amazed that the city can do what it's doing with the budget that those guys are given. I mean, they are very resourceful as far as rebuilding and reusing and recycling parts and pieces, and to make blowers run and aerators run and chlorinators run at the wastewater treatment plant. I mean, they can't do any better than what they're doing. And when Blake and I got done, we didn't see any room in the budget to say, oh, let's take 10 grand out here, let's take 20 grand out here. That didn't exist. And as we showed from looking at the expenses over the last few years, they hit their budgets each year. So it's the cost of doing business to a large degree with this kind of system. So with that, that's all I have for the studies, and happy to answer any questions.
So similar to the water loan question, what's the loan rate for the sewer fund right now for the loan that you mentioned that had the, I think, like 1.5 or 1.2?
The 1.2 debt coverage. I would have to look, Juliana. It's an SRF loan.
Okay.
And I think it's the loan for the 2010 project.
Okay.
That did the wastewater treatment plant and collection system. That was an SRF loan. But I've got the financials. I just don't have the numbers in my head.
Okay. And then in terms of our regulations around sewer, so you mentioned, thank you for mentioning the differences between the sewer districts like Weed that don't have the same requirements because they don't discharge into a river. But are we held to a higher standard because we're on the Sacramento and it is a fairly clean river system as opposed to, say, those who discharge into the Pitt River?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the thing that exacerbates that is the fact that the river's much smaller up here than it is in the city of Redding.
Yeah.
So the larger the river, you get more credit for dilution. Up here, you don't have the benefit of that. So they're trying to limit, certain concentrations of ammonia and metals in the water so they don't impact the macroinvertebrates. But when you have a small river, a small dilution volume to deal with, it's even tougher to meet. So you can consider that, more difficult regulation, but that's what it translates to, yeah.
And just for the record, the Pitt River is really gross. It's really gross. You don't want to get in the Pitt River. Those are all my questions for right here.
Well, this is more commentary than question, having started working with PACE in 2008 when I rolled into Dunsmuir. And at that time, I think we were under daily fines from the State Water Resources Control Board because our sewer plant was wildly ineffective in meeting this dilution plan that the resource board had approved. In your presentation, you note in 2010, the state raised the stakes, copper, zinc, ammonia. Have similar tightened discharge requirements happened since 2010? And do you think they will occur in the next 5 years?
Yes, the discharge requirements for those three constituents have gotten tighter. You know, the big unknown at this point is what's going to happen with pharmaceuticals. The state wants to regulate pharmaceuticals. However, they can't come up with an economic way to treat for them that the rest of us can afford. But as soon as they do, that regulation is going to be imposed as well. But it's a moving target. You know, your discharge permit gets renewed every 5 years, and it looks completely different. The permit gets let out to the clearinghouse, and everyone that has an interest in the Sacramento River is able to comment to the state board and go and make their comments known. And you never know what's going to be said at those hearings. So,
Well, we all hope.
We don't need you for this meeting.
But we love you.
Bye, Sam.
Bye.
I realized that was him, and I knew he thought he had to be here for a meeting, so.
We all hope this is the last year of the drought, you know, the abundant snows and rains. But
Yeah.
if in fact
Not likely.
we go with the consensus of science that the upper Sac is likely to get lower water flows and warmer water flows, what will that do to our discharge requirements?
yeah. Well, you know, fortunately for the city, I guess, is the regional board regulates in arrears. So they're looking at historical data to impose future regulations.
Not too much longer, but yes, that's the historic practice.
Right. So, you know, they're going to look at river flows. They're going to pass river flows. They're going to look at, you know, your discharge constituents, and then they're going to impose future regulations based on that. So there would be a lag. That theoretically, if we went, you know, multiple years with drought and the city creates a database of river flows and treatment performance, that could impact what you need to comply with on your next permit.
I guess on that point too, in terms of water as well, you know, what would we be looking at in terms of with the new information coming out with climate change data that this drought's probably going to happen every 6 years now, as opposed to once every 100 years? I mean, what does that look like for our changing water system as well?
Great question. I wish I knew. I mean, those are questions that everybody's asking. I mean, to a certain extent with this drought, we're in uncharted territory. You know, we're having cutbacks in little water districts around the city of Reading that they've never seen. And, you know, Hornbrook ran out of water. And we're all in the water industry, we're scrambling with what to do. Oh, let's drill a well. Oh, you can't find a well driller. They're booked out 6 months. So what does the community do in the meantime? You know, that's what we're trying to navigate right now. So I don't have a good answer for you, but it will be difficult at best.
Will that likely be a bigger section of our water master plan though for the future when we do that?
Yeah, potentially it should be, yeah, absolutely discussed. And you know, assuming we get through this year unscathed, we'll have that experience that we can draw from to try to plan for the future for the city.
How old are the water and sewer master plans?
The water plan is 2016. The sewer plan is 2007. But in the financial plan on the sewer, we have a budget allocation there to update the sewer plan within the next 5 years.
I'll save the rest of my thoughts for when we get to vision and planning, but it's my strong belief, looking at the rate chart, that discharging into the Sacramento River for the two communities that does it, it's unsustainable. It will bankrupt our tiny base of ratepayers, and it's stupid.
Yeah.
So we need to start looking at alternatives. I've had this discussion before as to, can we do it like McLeod? McLeod doesn't put any of their effluent in the McLeod River. Well, no, we don't have enough space. Well, can we truck it to the same farmers' fields that weed does. The idea of trying to defang pharmaceuticals will be a game changer. We just won't be able to do it, and to continue to incur debt and loans and bailouts, I think we're doing a disservice to the community if you're looking ahead. But those are just my views.
Thank you, Councilman. It's a little beyond the questions. I have a question about the possibility of refinancing. This gets into your world. Is that something that can be done?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I know USDA will do it. I believe SRF will do it.
Even just getting that down to 10% instead of 20 is huge.
Yeah, you just, yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, and I'll qualify my answer there, Matt, in that they'll refinance all day long when you're negotiating a new loan with them and add an existing loan in, right? But in terms of going to them and saying, hey, we don't want a new loan with you, we just want to refinance our existing loans, I don't know if they'll do that or not, but it's a question worth asking.
I wonder if we could, just, I have no knowledge of whether this is something that should be done or not, but that 500,000 that you're looking at in the water fund, whether we could borrow, I guess they're project-specific loans?
Typically, that's my experience, yeah.
We've got a lot of questions about, I don't particularly, well, that's beyond stuff of this. I don't see it here because it's not as detailed as our 2019 plan. It was incredible as far as the details go. But I'd like to see projections for the commercial revenue, commercial side revenue. And I know it's based off of a residential unit. So many of those per the ratio of their wintertime water usage. But if we're digging this back up, and going back to 2018, and we're this far off where we need to be, I think it's important to maybe revisit that wintertime water usage. I know there's a lot of businesses that use, hotels are the easy one to look at. We don't have too many of those in town, but their wintertime water usage could literally be 10% of summer.
Right.
So that might not be a fair reflection. I think it's probably important to make sure no one's slipping through the cracks in terms of paying their fair shares. And I don't know if you guys did any work in terms of looking at that system again. I'm not talking about a complete update like we did last time. That was,
right. Right. Yeah, we really didn't go in that level of detail on this one, where we looked at, every connection and compare water use with projections and that sort of thing. We kind of treated it more like an update. On the sewer side, since we've only been in a couple years now, it's kind of like, well, you'd like to have a little more data, going forward to kind of restructure that, but we did not do that.
Well, I'd be curious if we do move in that direction, making sure that when we do pick the winter months, that we also look at the weather patterns and compare it to adjacent businesses. Because again, if we have a winter where, say, the ski resort didn't open, we're going to have a lower hotel usage, even more than what we would have
yet
for
that
a better
summer,
winter.
we could end up with a good spring, and the busiest tourist season of all time.
Right.
Yet we're paying off of that rate. So I think that with the way our town operates, as far as volume goes, that's an area we probably need to address while we're at it. Now we're going to wait for the next 5-year plan to kick in, but
I think just being as accurate as we can is going to be really important.
And I'd be fine with actuals.
Yeah.
If that weren't administratively difficult.
Well, I can tell you the revenue by user class, commercial, residential, institutional, all that, we have that information. Our revenue projections are based on that. But as far as looking at individual accounts within those user classes, we can certainly get that, but we didn't go through that effort on this update.
I think it's just a correction, because we used to have like 100 different categories.
Right.
And who got what category was a little obscure.
Yeah.
Difficult to keep track of. We made it all one category based off of the rate. But maybe we need to look back and realize that some of these businesses, because of that, are going to really be potentially just slipping through the cracks. And I think we just need to tighten it up.
Yeah, and you're always going to have that. The only way to get around it is we could do, instead of a wintertime water use, we base it on a monthly. Yeah. But when you get into irrigation months, you need to create a protocol that allows them to subtract out their irrigation use, which is what we did with Mount Shasta, right? So in Mount Shasta, the commercial pays their sewer rate based on monthly water use. But then if they have more than 2,000 square feet of landscaping, they go through a form and they fill out, and then they get that subtracted. It's kind of an administrative, I don't know, the city had, 50 or 60 of those.
It's being more widely used now.
Is it?
That
Yeah.
people are aware of it, because
Yeah.
it's offered to both commercial and residential users. But I think in terms of Dunsmuir, I mean, it's hard to imagine how many places we have that has 2,000 square feet of landscaping, because we're a little bit more spatially contained.
Yeah, especially on the commercial side, right? So that's why we thought that wintertime water use would be better for Dunsmuir, but there's always outliers like you're talking about. And hotels are tough because most of the patronage for them is probably arguably in the summertime.
Does Dunsmuir have the same option as metering sewage?
I think so. Yeah, that's certainly a way to do it too, but
There are certain users in Mount Shasta that chose to just pay for their own meter and pay a little bit more to install that meter, and then they pay a metered sewer usage. The golf course, yeah, they meter it. The golf course is an example of that. The golf course does not have a water account with the city of Mount Shasta, but they do have a sewer account, and so they have installed a sewer meter, and they pay based off of that plus the base rate.
But did they put reclaimed water on the golf course?
Yes.
yep,
See, that's the genius.
yeah.
So then I've got just a general question that kind of relates to some of what Councilman Arth was bringing up, but where is the largest source? I mean, I guess let's start with this. Are we projecting in these projections 2.5% inflation a year or higher for costs?
For sewer, yeah, I think we were projecting 2.5 generally, except for like employee-related costs. I think we were doing 5. And you mentioned the detail's coming,
No.
and that's articulated in there. But I think that's what we did, Matt, was 2.5 for most everything except for employee-related costs.
Okay. So then, is the largest expense that's going up the operations side? It sounds like we're not really planning any large projects that aren't grant-based.
Correct.
So if we get any of these grants, are they going to translate slowly into, say, a lot less being spent on repairs and operations? Or is it really just different types?
Are you referring to the sewer or water?
Sewer.
Yeah. I would say that, the city, I don't think it has a real extensive history of SSOs in the collection system. So it's probably not gonna save much on the operating side in your collection system. But at the treatment plant, it may improve a little bit, but primarily it should keep you out of the, ACL, the civil liabilities for not meeting your requirements. So I don't think it's going to be substantial, but there could be a little savings with your long-term O&M if you implement these projects.
Yeah, and, that's enough for the details. Thank you so much for all the work.
I do have
throughout the
one
year.
other question, just kind of the culminating question of, just kind of the culminating question of, looking at our options moving forward. What is the scenario if we don't do an increase, or we plan to do an increase in 2 years versus today? What does that look like? And using Councilmember Arth's favorite term of kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, and I assume you're referring to the sewer fund primarily?
Both water
Okay.
and sewer.
Well, I know on the sewer fund, if without any rate increases, the fund will continue to go in the hole about $165,000 a year, each year going forward, assuming expenses stay the same. On the water side, basically that, nice cash reserve that you have built up that you're going to presumably use to loan money and pay for capital project, it's going to get whittled down over time, and you'll have less, less to use it on later.
Do you predict that we would see significant increase in the cost of construction for some of the projects that we prioritize for the next year?
It's crazy right now. You guys, I thought, got really good prices on this project. We just bid a project last Friday in Wairika, and we were getting gravity sewer prices from $225 a foot to $450 a foot for gravity sewer. And part of it is it's deep trenches. Part of it are the bidders' uncertainty with being able to get materials. No material suppliers will hold their prices for more than a week after bidding. So bidding contractors are having to throw money in their bids, so they're made whole if they've got to buy pipe in 6 months that went up, 200%. So as far as what it's going to do, it's anybody's guess. Public works construction rarely goes down significantly, but it's been crazy.
I assume 5% was used for water.
5%, let's see, on water, I think we used the 2.5 also.
Even though the
I would
actual
have to look. Again, I didn't bring all that detail with me, but actually I might. This is your detail. It's just we assume 3%, Matt, for water, and primarily because of what CPI inflation's doing now.
Now it's at 5.4.
Well, but it was higher than 1%. Also, CPI is not a good indicator of public works. CPI is groceries and clothing and that kind of thing. But you guys, it's about power, raw materials, other utilities. CPI doesn't cover all those things.
Yeah, so it should be.
And so generally, they have the municipal cities index. Is that right, Blake?
Yeah.
I've never really looked at what's in there, but I expect it's more applicable to you guys than what CPI is.
Cool. And then this is kind of a clarifying question. Do you have a rough sense of, I'm sure the committee does too, what the sewer increases would look like according to the same expense schedule if we didn't loan the 500,000 from water?
I do have that, and I can provide that. We actually, I presented it to the committee once, and it was ugly.
I could say that I was responsible for this recommendation for this solution, because when you look at the numbers without it, it's really painful.
Do you guys know what they are?
Not off the top of my head. It was, in year one, it was $5 or $6 a month more, or something like that, or more.
No. More than what those rates are.
Yeah.
More than what those rates are.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. A lot more. Did it affect water? Well, we said it wasn't working water.
Right. Yeah, it didn't affect water.
So that loan was just meant specifically to reduce the pain in those first 2 years and allow us to get back on track. So that's what that's all about then.
I'm curious to know what some sort of refinancing the different terms with the three loans could look like, and maybe achieve a similar outcome. But
Mr. Mayor, I'll recommend we see if the finance director or city manager had anything they want to add in this. So what's on?
Oh, well, Todd's trying to find the mute button on his computer, or if Wendy needs to do it herself.
welcome, Todd.
I'll just say that I just want to say thanks a lot to Paul. I know he and I worked a lot together, but Paul has done a great job, and I just want to say thanks to Paul.
So I didn't hear the question.
I was going to say that Blake did a good job of kind of leading on this, and so pulling this all together was testament to his work and everything he's done.
Thank you, Blake. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Todd.
So I'm sorry, I missed your question.
Do you have any comments you'd like to make just here at the end before we go over to public comment and et cetera?
We're in an unfortunate situation. It is a rate that we would have been paying anyway. It would have alleviated the pain if we were paying it all along, but it is what it is. Nothing really that we can do about it.
Thank you so much, Todd. Are there any further questions regarding the presentation? All right. Seeing none, thank you so much, Paul, for that presentation, and Bruce. I'm going to move us on to our general public comment. I know that it's going to be tempting to want to discuss what we've been discussing this whole night, but this is for any items not on the agenda. So the rate study presentation will be up for public comment here in a second. But this is just general public comment for tonight's meeting. So if you wish to make a public comment about any item not relating to sewer or water rate studies, come to the podium or hit the raise your hand function and say your name, address. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. Good evening, Mr. Bush.
Hi, Michael Bush, Butterfly Avenue. I wanted to give the council the benefit of me living here 75 years and knowing something that I think that most of you guys don't know. And it's about flooding. Flooding from the Sacramento River. We have a lot of low-lying streets in Dunsmuir. They're close to the river. Everybody knows River Avenue, Butterfly Avenue, South First, up at Shasta Retreat. And I'm very, very concerned about the massive amount of logging that is going on north of us. For example, everybody knows about the Blackberry Timber Harvesting Plan, but there's also another plan called the Hedge Plan. And people are not even aware of these timber harvesting plans that are going in north of us. And the reason that's very important is because all of them, very simply, it's so simple, all of it drains into the Sacramento River, and it all comes right through Dunsmuir. It's extremely simple. You guys have been talking about complicated stuff, but this is very simple. You can just envision all these tributaries coming down, running through these clear cuts and other logging that they've done. They're doing massive amounts up there. You've all seen them, I think when you Google and you go up and you look down, you see, wow. I mean, I anticipate massive flooding. And I've lived here a long time. I've had to swim out of Butterfly Avenue before in 1972 when they did a lot of this harvesting. So I don't think the city council anticipates or realizes how serious all of this is. All of this is going on. They're cutting up above Lake Siskiyou. When the water runs down, if Lake Siskiyou can't handle it, it runs right over the top. Now it comes right down on Butterfly and the other towns, other streets. So I want the council to be more aware of these timber harvesting plans that are going on north of us. Because I anticipate as a longtime resident that there will be massive flooding on the lower streets of Butterfly, lower streets of Dunsmuir. So please be aware of that. And there's the new timber harvesting plan. It's called Hedge, and it's up above Dollar General. So on both sides of the freeway. And people are not aware of these things because they don't
30
know
seconds,
how.
Michael.
Pardon?
30 seconds.
Okay. People don't know how to access what's happening. You know, they don't know where to go for information. And that's why these harvesting plans go through all the time. By the time people figure out where they are and what they're about, the public comment period is about over. So please be aware of what's going on. I can't talk anymore because I don't have any more time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Comment. Are there any further public comments this evening for the general public comment section?
Seeing none.
Seeing none, we'll move forward into council and staff comments. Since we had a regular meeting last week and we'll have a regular one next week, unless there's anything pressing on the council side. Staff have any general updates?
Do not.
Todd?
I've got nothing to add at the moment.
Thank you so much. Same with committee reports. Let's move through. We do have the, yes.
I don't have a committee report per se, but I do note that we have not yet selected the public members for the ad hoc solid waste committee, and I am recruiting a third applicant, but I do think it would benefit our work. We're on the cusp of approving contract with Clemens, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. So I don't know what the process is, but I wish we could get our public members.
Thank you, Councilman R. Approval of the minutes for last week, August 5th.
Moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Motion carries. 4 in favor, 1 absent. We have no consent agenda, no public hearing, no old business, so it moves us into the central item of the day, new business discussion, possible action regarding the preliminary findings of the updated sewer and water rate study committee. Kind of goes with where we're at. I think it'd be nice to open up the public comment at this juncture. Objections to that. Right, same process as before. Come to the podium, say your name, address, and you'll have 3 minutes to comment on this. You can go first. And just remind everyone, it's not a back and forth, but we'll write down anything so we can address it in comments, and I'm sure Paul will be happy to address some of the color comments and total later.
Okay, on the subject of low income rate, I don't know if the word is subsidies or what the word would be, but helping low income people. And there was another word Peter used.
Lifeline is an often used term.
Yeah, lifeline.
With the notion that water and those things are essential basic needs.
Exactly. So Peter, to save time, Peter said it perfectly. What he said, I totally agree with. He said it just exactly right. I know that it's a legal thing as to whether you can do it or not, and you have to talk over with the attorneys, and Paul talked about that. Of course, I don't know about that, and nobody knows about that except, the higher ups. So, but I'm just hoping that that will be incorporated some into the rates. For 10 years, I've been involved with this, and I've always come to the podium and asked that do something for the really poor people. There's nobody here, they don't speak for themselves, but they really suffer a lot with high rates. Peter knows that. So that's generally it, but I really agree with what he says. I hope that finally maybe something can be done, something simple, that it's not a lot of work for you guys, like if they're on SSI or they're on LIHEAP or something, that qualifies them for something. Not a lot of work for the staff to do. Just something simple. They can correlate the lower rates for Dunsmuir with some other rates that they're already qualified for. So I'm trying to make it easy for you. There's not a lot of work for you guys to do. But I think it's possible to do as long as it's legal. And that seems to me the whole question. But I hope you will seriously look into that, because there really are a lot of people suffering. They just don't have enough to go around. And that was my comment.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bruce. Anyone else would like to come either up to the podium or go to the participants tab and hit the raise your hand button to comment via Zoom?
Seeing none.
I want to give another 10 seconds or so in case anyone wasn't at their computer. If you'd like to comment on the water rate study preliminary findings from the committee, you can do so now by raising your hand or coming to the podium. All right, seeing none, I will now close public comment on this item. We can move forward with discussion.
I'd like to begin if that's okay.
Please proceed.
In reference to just Councilmember Art's point that he brought up during the presentation and our public comment today, there are a couple of options for lifeline funding or assistance programs for utilities. And just for an education piece, one of the things we cannot do is we can't have special rates within the 218 to give people different rate based on their income. But there are different programs throughout the state of California which are legal. The two options primarily used is a special tax that's taxed on to a sales tax, TOT tax, or other type of special means on that feature. It's done very differently depending on the city. For example, the city of Sacramento has a special tax on sales tax that goes to utility, food assistance, and housing assistance, which collects funds, and they do a program. So there's a lot of forms and information that's already provided there that we would not have to recreate for that type of program. The other primary use that is out there is a surcharge program. There are a couple of counties that do a percentage surcharge onto rates. I don't know the legality of that, or if there's special circumstances for those counties. It was Kern County and Contra Costa County that do a certain percentage that's added on fairly to every user that pays for that program. Again, I'm not sure if that was grandfathered into the 218 system or not. That's not as widely used. So I would think that that maybe happened before a certain Public Utilities Commission mandate. But the other option that people use is they use the surcharges charged to late pay accounts to pay for a lifeline assistance program as well. The late account surcharge currently that we charge is based off of state standards. So we're only allowed to charge a certain amount, not to be overburdensome, and it's part of a code enforcement government code section. So we're not allowed to charge, 25% if you miss a bill. It has to be, I believe, only a maximum of 10% completely. A lot of cities are moving away from that system because it's not a guaranteed fund per year. And so you have to be more competitive with those. But again, I sent an email while we were doing the presentation to the city attorney, city manager, and I think Paul and Blake, you also got a copy as well, to look at what the legality of a special tax would look like, as well as if they've all heard of any other means to pay for those pieces. Our city attorney, John Kenny, does work for a number he sits on a number of nonprofits related to housing assistance and low income programming. So maybe he's heard of something that I'm not familiar with. But those would be the options we would pursue. And that would, in my mind at this point, need to happen in tandem with what we're doing here.
Juliana, do you know if there's any possibility of working out a relationship with somebody like Great Northern Services?
That would be the other option. There are other cities that work closely with a nonprofit that provides the lifeline assistantships, because nonprofits are eligible for certain grants for those types of programs that the city itself is not. So yes, that is also an option. Thank you.
I think that would be something that we might want to take up at a future meeting, but I don't think that we have the time to try and work that into our situation right now. But I'm open to that idea of exploring.
Yeah, I think it's an important aspect as we move forward with this, with rate increases, because we are going to be talking about solid waste next. Just because, again, the cost of providing services, the cost to meet mandates is just disproportionately put upon us as opposed to the legislature that mandates it. And that's just the nature of our game, unfortunately. The only other option we have is to change the state legislature, which good luck to anyone who would like to do that. But in terms of the rates and the studies so far, I did do a little bit of research again while the presentation was going on, and found that the 2021 average water rate ranges from some estimates at $65 for base rate and up to $77 per base rate. And I checked a couple of different agencies, but the Cal Water does not have an update since 2015. So that's why that number, I'm surprised they haven't updated that.
If you find something newer, can you forward that to me?
Yeah,
I would love to get something a little newer than 2015.
Yeah, those were I got 3 different numbers from a couple of different national sources that take a look at renter utility billing. But yeah, so those are $65 to $77 between those 3. The most accurate one was $72.93 for a base rate. But again, that's only a base rate. It does not look at how much it is per gallon people are paying in addition to that. So, and then again, putting it into perspective for nationals, for sewer, it was anywhere from $59 to $69.17 for a base rate for sewer throughout California for 2021. I understand the need to cut back. I really hope that this becomes a bigger, I hope it becomes a bigger conversation for water conservation, for looking at ways to continually bring down our usage. For me, for water, that seems to be some of the only other options that we have moving forward. Especially with the new climate report coming out this week, estimating that we're going to see droughts more often. They're going to become much more severe. We're going to have to look at water storage systems in a much more earnest way that we haven't had before. And for example, the city of Shasta Lake is going to be talking about purchasing water from the city of Reading. So to have two desert arid-based cities purchasing water from each other is not a good sign for the state as a whole. And I mentioned this again to a couple of other people. You have to look at where power sits in the state of California. It's not with small cities. It's with agricultural users. It's with economic users who are going to be demanding more water appropriations. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be a huge change in water rights for the state of California in terms of cities, and having our appropriations lowered up here to provide more economic value for agriculture and other industries that use that water. So I don't like rate increases. I don't want it to be our only option moving forward to meet state mandates and what we need to do to take care of our system. But I don't see a very good future moving forward. This is probably going to become our way of life, and having to factor in higher and higher utility percentages of our income, which is unfortunate. But there's a lot at play here besides us wanting more money. It's not that simple. So I reluctantly would move forward with the rate increases, with the hope that we start to talk about other options to be able to save our residents and businesses money in terms of utility expenditures.
Thank you, Councilwoman Casey. Does anyone else have any comments, statements, points of discussion?
Well, we'll save the lifeline discussion for another time. And I didn't know under the protocols, can any of us contact the city attorney if we want to?
Yes. He works for city council and city.
He doesn't have to respond. The city manager usually intervenes. So I sent it to both Todd and him. So Todd could intervene and say, don't answer the question or do that.
Well, I just, having spent about 7 years of my life working for lifeline rates that the California legislature passed enthusiastically at the cusp of the energy crisis, because people were dying, they couldn't afford air conditioning. And, rate making is as complex as chemistry or calculus. There is a cost of service method, there is a value of service method. And depending on the methodology the rate maker uses, there is plenty of room to charge a poor person less than a rich person for the same commodity and the same connection. So whoever thinks you can't do it legally, I'd love to see your research.
Well, we said we were going to save that for another time.
Well, but now I'm not sure, and I guess the bigger question is, where do we go from here? I got 3 recommendations. One is to sync up water and sewer studies. I got no problem with that. The second is to pay off the existing water loan. I think that's a good idea. And the $500,000 loan, I'm dead set against to the sewer fund from the water fund. I think it's inconsistent with everything we've been trying to do over the last several years. So I would like to see the recommendations, at least the 2 involving money, go to the finance committee. I'd like to hear what the city treasurer has to say about that. Mario and I have been doing this from the beginning. Does he think these are good ideas?
And to Council Member Arth's point, I did write down to request at the end of this meeting and future agendas to agendize the interfund loan and the water expense as items for the finance committee. So by the time that this comes back in earnest, we will hopefully have another committee review of those.
Yeah.
As I get it, you haven't looked at it.
I'm
We
sure
have
that
not.
to explain the source of that loan in terms of using it to slow down the increase, make it less painful. I mean, we're all behind that, and we actually appreciate the committee for focusing on that. I myself was a little taken aback by it because of the 3 years, almost 3 years I've been in office now. I've been defending Dunsmuir for not doing interfund borrowing on a frequent basis. And maybe this is more normal than I realized when it's between water and sewer. I know that the complaints throughout Dunsmuir was that the general fund and the ratepayer funded enterprise funds. So maybe we could clarify that and work on that. I think the finance committee has already done, at least in my 2 years there, a lot of work on that topic. So probably a good place to take it. Councilman Deutsch?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to summarize by making it clear that, first of all, every one of us hates the idea of raising it 1 single cent. We'd like to be able to say, guess what? We met and we decided we're not going to raise any rates. We wouldn't have a water system. We wouldn't have a sewer system. So what we tried to do is to come up with the best way possible of working it out so that there was the least amount of pain possible. That's what this is all about, the least amount of pain possible. The idea of the inter-enterprise fund loans, I've been very aware of all of the history of how Dunsmuir has operated inappropriately with general fund going here and there. This is absolutely nothing like that. This is a process that cities, as Paul mentioned, do all around the country. It's meant to allow the cities to have the flexibility to manage 2 very complex enterprise funds. The water fund will actually be making money out of the process. Of course, the sewer fund will be paying for that. But all of this comes down to the simple fact that we are required to maintain rates that allow us to operate, maintain, and improve our system. And what we propose, and I'm sure there are other ways of working the numbers, and I'll support the idea of letting the finance committee take a look at this. But I just really would hope that we come away from this with the idea that the way things were done before 2015 and 16 are behind us. This is about maintaining a healthy set of enterprise funds so that we don't have any huge problems down the line. Just maintaining as best we can with the world around us, the price of things, and that's all this is.
Thank you, Councilman Deutsch. I myself am, I hate the idea of raising it a penny, but all around us, the cost of doing business is increasing at a much faster rate than we're even used to. You know, the 2% or so that we kind of just don't even factor in the background, that's no longer here. I mean, we're at 5.4%, I think, for July, year on year for inflation. With all the stimulus dollars, and Dunsmuir is a recipient of a lot of these stimulus dollars, guess what? All these cities are getting funds to do things, and they're all bidding with each other, essentially, for the people who can do those things. So we're actively part of this inflation that's happening, at least short term, before our eyes. So I think what we need to remember is, you know, if we didn't have an increase each year, we'd actually be going down in real terms. And that has happened many years in Dunsmuir. It's part of the reasons why we had to raise, last time we raised sewer, we had to raise it, is because they stayed the same, which isn't actually staying the same. It's going down 2 to 3% each year. So I just think that's important to remember that. I'm fine mostly with the water. That seems reasonable to me. Unless, of course, any sort of clever refinancing could happen with that 1994 loan. If we could hold it at something like 1%, I think it'd be wise to do it. I'm very curious about further research into the possibilities of changing some of the terms for the sewer fund debt. I do think, I would hope that we can get some more information on that before we finalize this. I'm instinctively against the 500,000 loan between the funds, but that's mostly because of, you know, all my time here defending the fact that we're not doing any of this interfund borrowing. If it needs to happen, I'm open to looking at it, but I do think a really good place to look, maybe for the long term, would be if we could redo some of those. Even just, I'm sure the numbers would turn out much better in our favor by potentially trying to do that. And even if we have to do the 500,000, I do think while we're revisiting the sewer, we should address some of the issues that we see there, including the commercial rates, if that's something that could be worked into this. I don't know time-wise if that would be possible, but I think Blake has some thoughts on that.
Yes, I was going to stress the urgency of sewer rates. I just really, I can't stress enough that the sewer fund needs new rates.
I have a clarifying question.
Yes.
Paul, what does this all look like if we do get the infrastructure bill through this calendar year? And this is the federal one, just for everybody's edification.
Yeah, well, I think of, when they passed Proposition 1, it took the state 2 years to roll out the funding eligibility criteria to start using the money.
Okay.
Right? So I don't expect anything to happen very quickly. In terms of how it affects you guys, you're already well suited. I mean, your water projects are basically all funded. One of your sewer projects likely is. Your second one, I don't see it being funded any quicker. So I don't know that it affects you guys much. I mean, if they could come out, remember the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARRA, when Bush got in there several years ago, and they had all this money for shovel-ready projects. If you could show a shovel-ready project in 45 days, we'd write you a check. Some of that could come out of it too, and we could come up with a project for you guys in 45 days to take advantage of that if we had to. But it's unknown.
Do we
now.
we know right now what funding, what the trickle down funding would look like if it passed? Would it be going into Prop 1, or do we know if it would go into a Fed-based USDA funding?
Yeah, I don't think we know that, but it seems like the state revolving fund is getting all the money from all different sources, whether they're voter passed propositions or their Fed allocations. They seem to get all the money, and they're the most difficult to deal with, but they also have the highest grant opportunities. So you put up with that to get those big grants, and it takes them forever.
Can I add something to this? Local rulemaking, Paul's right, it's gonna be at least 2 years before we actually see something come down at the local level if everything passes as promised. The other portion of this, backing up, looking at COVID relief coming from the feds and how long it's actually taken for HCD to get this money out on the street to us, and it's a much smaller program. The other piece of this is once that money does trickle down, you're going to see another really big spike in inflation, and just because everybody is going to be competing for the same contractors and the same materials, for all these infrastructure projects. So anything we can get done now, the better off we're going to be.
Well, it sounds like we're in a good position water fund wise to do just that. Okay. All the major projects.
And so real quick, just going back to this timing and urgency thing. So we would, the Prop 218 process, we would send out notices that requires a 45-day window of allowing people to research, do their own stuff. We want to have a town hall potentially. So that 45 days. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is if we start to establish these new rates, and Paul's figured it out now to where the new rates would be started October 1. Is that right? October 1, I think we said, or maybe November 1. It might be November 1.
Is way too soon.
I wouldn't leave 45 days.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so November 1. So we started off this whole process at the rates being a certain level, which is hard to swallow. Then now that we are at this rate now where the rates, if they could be established November 1, they already increased dollars.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just cents, it was dollars that had increased from when we first started. So I just throwing that out there to try and stress the urgency of instituting.
With that in mind, Mr. Mayor, what I recommend is that we schedule this to come before the Finance Committee between now, if we have our next meeting.
We have a meeting on Monday.
Are you meeting Monday?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you were to meet Monday and look at this, come back for a council meeting next Thursday, we'd be able to do it a lot.
Well, I think at least one of the questions I hope we address is the possibilities of refinancing those. I don't know if that needs to be done now or it could be done in addition to, but
I don't think we're going to be able to make a decision on refinancing by Monday or at Finance Committee on Monday. We can discuss it and research it.
Yeah, I think,
It's a great idea.
I think the two major points for Finance Committee on Monday would be the interfund loan and the water expenditure, expending the reserves on the loan. So if
I can tell you all right now, that's totally fine.
okay, so we can do that, those 2 points at least. And then at a later date, possibly look at the refinancing. Councilmember Arth has a question.
Yes.
Well, not a question, a data request. I want to see the rates if we don't do the loan.
Yeah.
On the sewer side.
I would like that as well. See both options.
Would you like me to attend the finance committee meeting on Monday?
I think that would be helpful.
That'd be
Okay.
helpful, yes.
We're meeting at 5 p.m. and we have a Zoom option for you, so you don't have to drive up the hill. Unless you really want to. You can check the air quality and see which one's better.
Exactly. It'll be based on that, yeah.
And so I guess just logistics, the cheapest way to go when sending out the Prop 218 notices is to try and do it within the utility bill. But if we can't do that, then that's one thing.
I also, to my other point, I'd like to hear if anyone's supportive of it as well, to look into the commercial rates. While we're taking it before the people, it's the time to correct anything.
So basically, if we table today to make a decision next Thursday, pretty much we would have to have that information by Monday at the latest.
Well, to make it by November 1st, I mean, would we make an adjustment easily enough to December 1st? I don't want to delay it, but I don't want to be put into an arbitrary time frame if we have time to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, kind of to kind of expand on what Blake was explaining, the longer we wait to implement these rates beyond the beginning of the fiscal year, each month, the need for the rate increase goes up a couple bucks each month that we delay. I mean, you can appreciate the compound effect of starting at the beginning and then it compounds over 5 years, right? So each month, it's kind of like waiting until you're 30 to get into your 401k as opposed to getting in at 25. So, wait until December, I got to go back in and take a month of revenue out and recalculate the rates, and all those rates are going to go up a couple bucks. So that's kind of what Blake is explaining is at stake. But for Monday's meeting, I can talk to Kevin Demers probably tomorrow and talk to him about refinancing options. They would be the most likely player. And I can at least bring some information to the finance committee meeting on that.
Yeah.
That would be USDA. And I can also bring a workup of what the rates would be if we don't do the interfund loan. And some of these things that you guys mentioned, I can bring that to the finance committee on Monday.
Okay, and we could make a decision on moving forward 218 next Thursday instead of today.
Well, does no one else interested in reviewing?
I think at this point, I would not be.
What do you mean interested?
No, reviewing the commercial rates. That's kind of been something that hasn't sat well with me since we passed it. We were under a time crunch then, and I was fairly new to the whole process and thought better to move forward with the benefit of the doubt. But since we were forced to revisit it sooner, I don't know if we could look into, and even if it's just a simple adjustment that, hey, we're not going to do wintertime anymore, we're going to do monthly, if that's possible.
I think,
or we're not going to do wintertime, we're going to do
increase the
spring.
rate.
what I see it as is it's jumping over what's the phrase? Jumping over a nickel to save a dime, or something? No, opposite. Jumping over a dime to save a nickel. I feel like the additional time to wait and see that is not going to amount to enough money in a significant change in the rate for commercial users as opposed to overall. So that's why I would say no on commercial for right now.
Well, without an extensive study, could we change the time that's full to maybe a more equitable time of the year? Maybe we go April, May, June.
Well, I think that if we're going to go with trying to adjust the commercial rates for sewer, I think that the easiest way to do that would be to just simply increase the rate based upon the amount that we're charging per unit. In other words, if we were to say that we're increasing the rates for residential this percentage, and we increase the rates for commercial the same percentage, then we would then get more money coming from commercial.
That makes a lot of sense revenue-wise, Councilman Deutsch. I totally agree. I'm concerned also about the equity side. So, it seems pretty clear to me that just the wintertime water usage is not the fair representation for all businesses, and that we could select a better thing. And the rates are already going up because the way it was all structured very beautifully and elegantly, all credit to Pace, and staff at the time. It's all based off of the essential residential equivalent, rate.
How much would it cost if we did not do that this round? How much would it cost to do that type of study to be partnered with the solid waste? So we're looking at possibly increasing solid waste. You wouldn't do the rate study for that because I don't think you deal with trash, but
I don't do trash, I just do poop.
yeah.
I'm not sure, Juliana, but kind of back to your point, Matt. Sorry.
It's okay.
There's no such thing as a one size fits all approach, right? So we could change the dates of time of year for water use, but that's going to alienate or treat some other business different, like what Mount Shasta did, like Juliana indicated. You could look at a monthly water use, but then you're going to have to implement something to account for the irrigation use.
You have to by law?
Well, yeah, because you're going to have businesses that have
businesses are gonna go through the
extensive
roof.
lawn, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm paying water use."
No, I mean,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, so you have to account for it that way. That's another way to do it. And I think too, to change a structure like that, I think it really needs to go through a committee kind of thing, because it's a trial and error. Paul, check these 3 scenarios and come back, and I bring them back. Okay, well, what about this? What's it look like if you do this? And it's kind of this iterative trial and error process until everyone kind of feels good about it. And I would hate for us at the council level and staff level to just kind of, well, let's just change this because it feels better without kind of going through that effort.
Yeah, I mean, my concerns here are coming from, of course, just my interactions with people in the town here, explaining how the rates have been changed, et cetera. So, I think, to Juliana's point, I'd love to know the dollar amount. I still don't know what that difference would represent. And if it's so small that it doesn't make a big difference.
Which difference, if just changing?
Well, we have all the data on water usage, so
Yeah.
we could, without too much work, extrapolate what a different quarter would look like if we used it.
Yeah, and the thing is if you go from March to June, you've got to compensate for irrigation, some portion of that. People are irrigating here in May probably, right?
Or take the average of the 6 months.
Well, it's still, yeah, but
Well, yeah,
you want
I
real
think
numbers, right?
My point was the time to take to go through all these scenarios versus how much possible increase it would be to move from November 1 to December 1. I would rather institute these in November 1 to avoid dollar increases for rates for everybody, just to investigate possible pennies and dimes for commercial users. I think that was the point I was trying to make of
Okay,
this.
gotcha.
But what I think would be, I think it's an important conversation to continue to have. And so my other question was, how much does that rate study cost to do just those scenarios? And could we do that and bring that back with the solid waste rate discussion? That would give us an additional couple months.
Yeah, you could certainly do that.
That's what I would rather
It would
do
have to be another 218, but we're doing one anyway. So.
with solid waste. And
Yeah.
so that way you could just do the commercial rate calculations at that time.
Would it be another sewer 218, like?
It would.
And different rates perhaps?
Yeah.
It would be another 218 for sewer within,
Yeah.
6 to 8 months. But again, you'd be getting the product that you're looking for.
I do apologize for, bringing this up kind of last minute for it, but I've been looking forward to bringing it up at the correct time, which I've interpreted to be when it comes before us.
Yeah.
So, I'm open to other suggestions, but my inclination is to, one way or another, work to solve that inconsistency.
Yeah. So that's why I would,
Wait, when do we have this town hall meeting?
we would have to have it in the next month.
After we send out the notices? That seems, well, other than Citizen Bush, we've not heard from a single member of the public. Most of them don't know about our little problem with the phantom accounts. Businesses don't know that they're at risk for carrying a bigger proportion of the increases on the sewer side. So
We can just,
having spent a lot of time in public hearings, to cook the cake and say, here it is, take it or leave it, that's not a good public meeting or including business in my book.
Although I will say, Councilman Deutsch's presentation, I foresee that doing a lot of good when we do get before the public. Exactly the sort of information that needs to go before.
I think what we can do when we do the notices for the 218 process, we would have the date of the town hall. I would like to have that on the notice because then it serves as both the 218 notice. It also notices all the ratepayers that there is an additional town hall to talk about it, bring up points, answer questions.
So if we hear from a united citizenry and business, this is not the time. Not the time to raise taxes, not the time to raise sewer rates. Then do we just forge ahead or do we take a time out? What do we do?
That's literally what the 218 process is you're filing a protest vote. It is literally that process.
They're voting, not us.
Well, see, you take that as literally the process. Our job is to set the rates in a way that is best for everybody, all
That's what we
user
did.
classes.
So in the
That's what we've
218
done.
process, if 50% plus one
I
of
know
the
218
ratepayers,
process.
correct. So it is a vote of people to say, no, I do not want the rate. We
Well-
can't accept the 218 vote if more than 50% of the people don't want it.
Councilman Deutsch made the point, and he dates everything to 1516, even though it really began with an upset citizenry in 2008 and 9, where 218 has never succeeded. It's never come even close to succeeding on any utility rate increase in Dunsmuir, but that has nothing to do with how angry the people were to be handed this on a plate and say, here it comes.
Well, in 2016, we had the same citizenry that were there in 2007. Maybe some new folks, but they were, please, it's my turn. It's my turn. What I'd like to point out is that in 2016, we had a 3-hour long town hall. And during the first half of that, looking around the room, I could sense the feeling that, yeah, there were a whole lot of angry people in the room. And we went through the process step by step, just like we did tonight. And by the end of that, there were no outbursts of anger. Everyone left, everyone understood. And when we went through the protest vote, out of the approximately 800 we needed to overturn it, we had 40. 4-0.
All right, thank you so much. There's been a lot of success and failure when it comes to interacting with difficult decisions in the full citizenry. I'd like to point out that a great many members of this council served on the committee for 2019's rate increase, and the current council makeup actually had a very successful outreach, and I thought that that went about as well as raising the rates could at the time. We did have, I think, a very, very important workshop, and I think we'll have that here, probably coming up in the next 2-3 weeks based on the schedule.
So are you looking for a motion to move forward with scheduling a public hearing?
I'll go ahead and do that. I'll make a motion to pass this on to the Finance Committee to bring it back to the council at our next council meeting with the understanding that if we decide to move it ahead, that we will schedule a town hall within the appropriate time.
I'll second. We're basically tabling it to the next meeting. Just, that was a very long way of saying table to the next meeting, so I want to be very clear that we are not setting it yet. We are looking at other options, so. Just a second.
All right, motion and a second. Any discussion of motion? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Against? Motion carries. 4 in favor, 1 absent.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
One small little thing. I just hope that we all realize now that as we're going on this path, that our deliberations inside of here are one thing, but once we come together as a council, the idea is that we're all going to try and sell what we have decided we need to sell. So it's our job, once we've come up with and feel comfortable with it, to be on the side of explaining to people why we're doing it. So,
Well, I've heard every person on this council continuously defend the basic principle that, you know, you can't kick the can down the road.
Well, I don't know, I'm more than up to that option.
Okay. Well, look forward to it at our next meeting. We don't, I have the future agendas item from the last meeting that applies to the coming one. I will have one again next meeting. So that brings us to adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Paul.
You bet.
Really appreciate your work.
Thank you, Todd. Did you see me try to take a drink out of my water when I? I'm really.